If you've been following video games recently, you might have heard of a little game called Baldur's Gate 3. You heard of Baldur's Gate 3?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah?
No.
Huge success, won multiple awards, made a great deal of money, including money through licensing deals for Hasbro. One of the bright spots in a year that was pretty bad in some other ways for the company, and yet another way that the Wizards part of Hasbro was profitable and did well for them.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, last week, Larian Studios, who make Baldur's Gate 3, their CEO, Swen Vincke, was at the Game Developers Choice Awards to accept the award for Best Narrative, and he gave a speech at an event that seems like it, from what we could tell. I'm not that familiar with it, but it seems like it's full of industry people.
Yeah, it seems like a pretty big conference.
Yeah.
The industry.
Yeah, almost an insider kind of an award is the impression I got. It's chosen by a panel of people who know things about the industry, or the people who are the jury for that prize.
Yeah, and they're all game developers.
And yeah, a lot of game developers, if not all game developers. Yeah. He delivered what seems like, and I'm just reading it off the page, but a mildly blistering speech about the state of game development and video game publishing. Here are a few things that he said. First, about the video game industry, he said, "It's always the quarterly profits. The only thing that matters is the numbers. Then you fire everybody, and then next year you're going to say, shit, I'm out of developers. And you're going to start hiring people again, which just kicks off the same loop anew." He also said further in the speech, "You don't have to do that. Build more slowly and make your aim improving the state of the art, not squeezing out the last drop." And another quote that really stood out to us: "Respect the people making the games. You'll find it brings you more joy." Why are we talking about a video game in the Tabletop RPG channel? Because something that really stands out about this for me is the contrast between this and the approach Hasbro is taking in regard to, a different kind of game, but a fairly similar consumer base for these games.
Yeah, absolutely.
They're like polar opposites. Here you have a guy who had this unexpected smash hit. He could pressure people to make downloadable content. He's famously also said recently, they're not doing this. They're not going to release DLC for Baldur's Gate 3. They're not going to make a sequel. Obviously, everybody else involved in this probably wants them to, and he's walking away from it. He could do this. He could push his developers. He could do what he just described, suddenly hire up and just crank this thing into massive forced growth, is what you called it earlier when we were planning. I thought that was a good way to put it. And then it doesn't matter if, to the mind of somebody who's going to do churn and burn, like the people he's describing, it doesn't matter if the product is good anymore. You have that foot in the door, great product, and then you just milk it in the shortest term possible for the biggest profits, so you can sell your interest in it to some other poor slob and walk away.
Yeah, and churn out your next big hit in a short time that needs, at least in the game industry, constantly needs bug updates because it doesn't work when it's released.
Yeah, fair. Well, I'm even saying, I wonder, I can't claim to know the video game industry business side of it that well, but just having had a big corporate background before I was doing this, what's typical there is people getting promotions, just to walk away from that job, not for the long-term growth of whatever product they're working on. I've seen lots of product managers who just pushed everybody really hard, like employee retention, they couldn't care less. They're product manager, they want to get big name, go work for a bigger company, get better pay. Or in the case of a startup, which is kind of like what Larian was, sell it to someone big as fast as possible and not have to work anymore to make a living. In my hypothetical, they make the DLC really fast. People buy it because it's Baldur's Gate 3. They keep writing that cachet. This is Baldur's Gate 3. We're Larian. We made this great game. It's a D&D game. We do a sequel, Baldur's Gate 4, or we do some other D&D game. And then after they do that, he can walk away a multimillionaire by selling Larian Studios to whoever.
Right. And you'd have all these games pushed out in the next 2, 3, 4 years, and they would be at a significantly lower quality than what we're expecting out of Larian after the first initial release of Baldur's Gate 3, which, some people say is better than the original 2 that were done by BioWare.
I played the first one, Baldur's Gate 1. I did not play Baldur's Gate 2, but I would say Baldur's Gate 3 is superior to Baldur's Gate 1, and I liked Baldur's Gate 1 a lot. So that's not a mild comment. Yeah, it's a great game. Basically, this guy is walking away from what could be a lot of quick wealth generation for him. And, a lot of people will justify that and make the argument, yeah, but now I can, sure, maybe this wasn't great, but it's what I had to do to get here. Now I can use this money to do something better. I feel like we never really see that happen. And I feel like this guy knows that. This guy probably buys into a philosophy that I like a lot. Begin as you mean to go on.
Yeah.
He believes in this. He's not just going to short circuit it and tell himself that it's just temporary until I get a lot more money. Then I'll do better things. That doesn't ever seem to happen because you get on a treadmill then, right? As contrasted, I will now answer the question, what does this have to do with our channel? Contrasted to Hasbro and the way that they've been doing things. And what happens when our little tabletop RPG niche gets just big enough that the biggest game in that niche, Dungeons & Dragons, pokes its head once again. It's been a long time since D&D was in the mass market. Last time was around the basic and expert era, the little box sets when I was a kid in the 80s, and they would be in all the chain toy stores at that time. Like KB was a huge mall toy store chain at that time. They sold the box set of D&D. That's the last time you could call it mass market, maybe, at least to the degree that 5th edition is. They did have, I have to say, I do remember seeing 3rd edition and 4th edition books in bookstores and things. But to rise to the level of where it is now, where it gets acquired by a company like Hasbro, accidentally or not, I don't know. I don't know if Hasbro was only interested in Magic the Gathering when they bought Wizards and D&D came along for the ride.
I almost feel like that's the case.
I haven't really done the research to really know that.
Yeah.
And maybe that's another video that we'll need to do.
Right.
What happened? Why did Hasbro take D&D along with it? I think the answer is that they do see profit in it if they can make it not what it is.
Yeah.
Right? If they can make it not that niche product, because they also could have sold off D&D to somebody. So I question whether Hasbro had much interest initially in D&D. I don't know the story there. I do know that they acquired them, I think, either after the development was done for 3rd edition or after the very first 3rd edition rulebook was published. I just remember reading and hearing that 3rd edition was a passion project for Wizards of the Coast. Wizards bought TSR because TSR was in trouble. Wizards could, and Wizards as a company loved D&D. They wanted to make a passion project, and that's what 3rd edition was. It was Wizards of the Coast developers thinking, how can we make this still feel like D&D but be the best edition we've had? Hasbro acquired them at some point after that process, but Hasbro did own them while they were churning out 3rd edition supplements, and when they came out with 3.5, that was in the Hasbro era. Not sure about the story there, but certainly today, Hasbro has noticed the big popularity of 5th edition. Probably the most popular edition that's ever been published.
Easily, I would say.
It's hard to say. Basic and Expert were everywhere when I was a kid.
I say
there was a cartoon on TV on a major network.
Yeah. But I would say sales-wise, it'd probably be the largest.
That seems likely.
And most popular.
That seems likely. And I will say, regardless of any of that, for sure, it's in the zeitgeist in a bigger way now than it was back then. Back then, you might have heard of it. And if you had, you either liked it, you were indifferent, or you thought it was something for a bunch of weird nerds.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or like in a bigger way than people would say that today. Like, ugh, weird nerds playing that weird stuff and it's dice, but you don't win. Or you thought it was satanic and evil and you heard about it constantly in your church growing up.
I definitely heard that a lot too.
Did you?
Not in church though, just in general.
I'm glad for you that you didn't have to sit through those sermons. Yeah. And that's the thing. 5th edition also isn't contentious in the public's mind. The satanic panic thing, you still have some fringy religious groups talking about D&D that way, but you don't hear about it very much. It's not as, that was weirdly mainstream in the 80s, was the satanic panic against it was weirdly mainstream. There was a novel written, Mazes and Monsters. There was a movie made of that, which I think was Tom Hanks' first feature film. He was definitely the lead character in it, where Tom Hanks goes crazy because he's playing a game called Mazes and Monsters, which is obviously supposed to be D&D.
Yeah.
And he thinks he's his character and he loses his mind and I believe he kills himself. I know he tries to. I can't remember if he succeeds or not. Very popular movie, played on TV all the time. And I think the genius of Mazes and Monsters was that it wasn't religious. So the religious people could say, oh, look, that legitimizes us. That's a mainstream movie. It didn't come from us. But today, 5th edition D&D is kind of charming to people. And something a lot of people say they would like to try, including, I think, many more adults than were into it back in the 80s.
Yeah, I think a lot of millennials and probably some Gen Xers that never got into it are definitely like, you know what? I remember liking playing Make Believe, and I really enjoy board games. D&D sounds fun.
Yeah.
We can get around with a bunch of friends and drink and play a game that will turn into maybe a weekly or whatever session that we just all hang out.
It's kind of the new poker night.
Yeah, really. It really is.
It's always been my poker night, but now it kind of is for a lot more people. It's a lot more normalized. Yeah, that kind of thing, you take that. And also, I think even though the 80s were another decade, and I'm talking about the 80s a lot. I do know that D&D was created and first published in the 70s, late 70s, but it really hit that first boom in the 80s where the public became aware of it. Again, major broadcast network TV cartoon about the game only lasted a season, but it lasted a season without getting canceled. And for Saturday morning cartoons, that was kind of normal back then. Even if it did kind of poke its head into the mass market a little bit in the 80s, and that was comparable to the way that it has now, I feel like we're still in a different era. Even though the 80s was the Reagan era, the era we all thought we'd give trickle down a try. We thought that would work.
Yeah.
The era of the movie Wall Street and the slogan greed is good, and people not seeing the irony in that, but saying, oh, yeah, greed's a good motivator, good for the economy, and then everyone wins. Even though that time was rife with that stuff, I still feel like this idea of squeezing every last drop of money out of a property and not caring if it's good.
Right.
And even more so, the whole expectation of massive hockey stick growth. Investors saying to Apple, yeah, sure, you had one of the biggest smash hit, world-changing products in history, the mobile phone, the smartphone, rather. What's next?
Yeah.
Next year, you should have an equally huge breakthrough. I don't think we were quite that crazy in the 80s. So we have a moment again now where D&D is poking its head into the mass market, or it has been for the past few years.
Yeah.
In the kind of environment we have now, a company like Hasbro looks at that, and not necessarily saying Hasbro is alone in this. Any company that large would probably be doing what they're doing, but that's the environment now. Oh, this shows some promise. How do we squeeze every last drop of potential profit out of it? In this case, I would say by making it not be the niche that it is, by changing it enough that I'm worried it'll ruin it. Very different approach from what this guy from Larian Studios is saying.
Right. So, with the rise of nerd culture over the last decade, and the fact that being a nerd is like showing your nerd badge, it's cool now.
True.
Whereas, even 20 years ago, it was a little scarier to throw that out there in a lot of situations.
We're more consumery too.
Right.
We've been marketed to more, and I think we like swag and merch more than we used to.
For Big Bang Theory and what that ran for 10 years, and that was a huge, hey, these are nerds, and like trying to market towards those people. And that's what's been happening a lot more over I'd say the last decade and a half. And with that, I see Hasbro really trying to lean into that. And while the rest of the company may be hurting a little bit, really trying to leverage Wizards in a way to make them the money they're losing from the toys.
That's a good point too.
But they're doing it in almost a forced growth sort of way, I think, where they're forcing multiple products and horrible hours on people, as we've read from some of the comments after the firings. That like just insane goals on these people that are working for them, and then firing them after they've hit those goals to save more money on costs. They did that with the game team for Larian. They did that with a bunch of the D&D book writers. They've done that with a bunch of artists and creators on the Magic the Gathering side. And it's just this this cycle that it's that churn and burn and turn out tons of new products. I mean, look at Magic the Gathering right now. You went from 4, maybe 5 product releases in a year to I don't know, like it feels like 17. Like every month there's a new product.
Jamming every last Universes Beyond license from anyone that will do it with them.
They're leveraging more gamers into a tabletop game. And I think they're going to do that more with Dungeons & Dragons. We've already talked about how they're going to start doing Universes Beyond with Dungeons & Dragons. They're going to start pushing some of these things that we don't see and we wouldn't expect in a tabletop fantasy RPG.
The Office D&D edition.
Right. I'm waiting for the Fallout Dungeons and Dragons. I
That
mean,
would actually make more sense than The Office. But,
it would.
But now I kind of want to play The Office and just be like, what would the classes be? Like the Office pedantic, annoying guy, which is
no, I think you would literally just get the names of characters in The Office as a class.
Fair
The
enough.
gym.
They are kind of archetypes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But you get these things, and now they're trying to really force those out there to make more money and recoup any losses they're having on another side.
Right.
And that's a thing. They should leverage these IPs they have.
It's the pace, and
but it's the
whether
pacing.
whether we've asked for particular IPs or not. It's like, I don't know. Here it is. Let's just all And even that's okay. That's just throwing stuff on the wall to see what sticks. But to your point, it's the pace of it. It's the aggressiveness of it.
Mm-hmm.
It's the you're gonna save us. It's all on you. There's huge pressure, but also to your point, great job. You're fired.
Right.
You did it. You're fired. Which is exactly what Swen Vincke is saying. Larian CEO, which brings us back to what opened this video. The contrast here is amazing. These two things happening right around the same time. And between companies that are linked even.
Right, yeah.
This two roads diverging in Yellowwood, to reference a corny, often referenced thing, the guy from Larian is going down one path, Hasbro's going down the other.
Yeah.
I know I tend to get toward gloom and doom. And in our last video about AI, I was the gloomy doomy guy, and you made some good points that made me realize, like, oh, I do tend to be so pessimistic. I'm so protective of this. It's been part of my identity since I was maybe 10 or 11 years old, which was right when that first wave of mass market D&D hit. I'm really protective of it, and so I'm starting to do this old guy thing where it's like gloom and doom, and that's not how you do it.
Get off my lawn.
I have to admit, I'll admit I've had some gatekeepery tendencies before too, but I don't want to be like that. Like if I've noticed that happening, I do try to check it. And your perspective helps me with that too, because I get a little gloom and doomy. So I don't want to say, the point of that side rant is, I don't want to say that I know that this is going to hurt D&D. I don't want to say, because you kind of called me on that in the last video. I think you were right to do that. Like, we don't know that it's going to hurt it. Right. It's just that I think it could. It's something to keep our eye on. It could be, I'll still argue that Vink's approach is far better, and I bet we'll see a lot more success out of Larian for him being bold enough to take the choice of careful, planned, curated growth when you're ready. We don't all have to become a billionaire overnight, and he knows that. I'm sure he's doing really well right now financially.
Yeah, and we're talking about that curated growth. I'm a fan. In my philosophy in any sort of business venture is planned, curated growth. Don't force it.
Yeah.
Once you start forcing that growth and pushing and pushing and pushing, you spend money to grow. And then
you're on a treadmill.
You have to make more money.
Right.
To pay for the growth that you just did.
Yep.
But to make that more money, you need to spend more money. It's just a treadmill, and it just keeps building up and building up, building up until something dies.
Right.
Or you're purchased.
And this is worse when you are a publicly traded company, when you're beholden to shareholders who every single quarter, at the end of the quarter is what matters. How do we look? How do we look? How do we look? How do we look?
Yes.
You tell those kind of shareholders, you know what? We're going to take a half a year and pull back and retool and make sure that the rest of the year is good.
Yeah.
No, that line has to at least go like this. Most people want it to go like that.
Right.
Or from your perspective as a viewer.
And, double-digit growth is what everybody wants to see.
Right. And if you're Hasbro, you don't really have any choice, I guess. I don't know if that's true. I actually don't know if that's true. I'm trying to be fair to them. I should say
there are ways
there's a lot of pressure for them to do that.
There is. But there are also ways they could pivot.
That's true. As soon as I started to say that, I realized that. There are ways they could pivot and be more sensible.
Yeah. But they do have an expectation to make money. Hasbro's been around for almost 100 years at this point, so it's expected that they're going to stay around.
Right.
And keep doing well. And
that's true.
Being publicly traded, they are beholden to their stockholders in a way. But, again, there's ways they could pivot without forcing things down people's throats or forcing growth in sectors that maybe don't respond well to that forced growth.
Right.
As much as I love D&D, I don't know that D&D is a sector that responds well to forced growth.
Yeah.
I agree with you. Always been kind of a homegrown word of mouth sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely, I think the advertisement and more forward position in culture is great for the game.
Marketing is good. It's the kind of marketing that's acquired.
I love the idea of D&D movies and you know, I read the Dragonlance books and all these things, and you know, maybe more things like that would help in the growth for this, instead of forcing new product and new art generation and these universes beyond sort of things going into it.
Right. And this is why we did a whole video about AI. It's the last video we did before this one.
Yep.
This is why they're looking at AI, undoubtedly, because this is super low cost, high churn output prospect for them. You know, no, they're not going to do AI art. They've said they won't do that, although they didn't say they would never do it. I don't think. They just said they won't.
Yeah, I don't think they said that they're... Yeah.
Which, to be fair, is unwise of them, because in 50 years, that could be completely different, right?
Yeah.
But because no one has complained about AI-generated text content, adventures, or AI-generated co-players like an AI DM, we talked about a lot in that video, or AI players, that kind of thing. Yeah, and also in that video, my mind went to one of the good things you could do is do rapid play testing with AI players. Still not as good as doing it with human players, but it'd get you through some early rounds of some getting the big bugs out of it. That'd be great. But to stay on that treadmill, I think, is the reason that Chris Cox, the Hasbro CEO, is drawn to AI and likes the idea of it.
Yeah.
It's the same thing as churning out all of these Magic the Gathering sets super rapidly. And actually, he said he would like to see AI design cards for Magic.
I don't know if I like that. I mean,
I don't
rules,
either.
maybe rules, but you know, obviously, you know, I want to see the artwork stay,
of course,
in artist hands.
And it's funny to me, I think the best spec fic art that's being produced now, it's not book covers anymore. It used to be book covers where you see the real premieres of the Michael Whalen stuff, Frank Frazetta, these artists that had big names. Mostly that stuff was book covers if it wasn't just original art, or it was for magazines. Now, in my not so humble opinion, I guess, the best fantasy, the best sci-fi art, all of that stuff it's Magic cards. It really is.
Yeah, I agree.
That's where the premier best work is being done.
Yeah.
And to replace that with AI, you know, they said they're not going to use AI in D&D. I don't recall if they said they wouldn't use it as a company or if they wouldn't use it for Magic the Gathering.
No, I mean...
But if there wouldn't be an outcry, you better believe they'll do it.
They said they would use AI for, I mean, maybe not art, but...
They didn't specify.
Yeah, they did definitely say they're using it in games.
Right. And they'd like to use it in D&D. He did mention Magic, but he didn't say in what capacity. Yeah. I think he knows that if the words right now in the environment we're in, if he says the words AI art at all in any context, he's got more problems.
Right.
So he won't really say that, but I wouldn't put it past them.
No.
If I'm Chris Cox with his motivations and his particular values, or at least the values that I've observed and heard him talk about, if there was no backlash against AI art, I would just use it. He has no philosophical grievance with it. He just knows he's going to lose too many customers. And the OGL debacle taught them that matters to us.
Right.
But that's all different than what we're talking about now, is how we can make this Hasbro's big wet corporate dream of a cash cow, but still be the game that we love. And we're just going to have to stay tuned to figure that out. But I sure prefer what Larian says about all of this and what they do to what Hasbro is doing and saying, which makes me nervous.
Yes, absolutely. And you know, props to Sven and his philosophy on business. Like, I think it's fantastic.
And his bravery to just stand up at an industry event and say all that stuff.
To all the insiders be like, yeah, you're kind of doing it wrong.
Right?
We want quality products.
I get the impression he's standing in that room and he's basically saying, all you emperors do not have clothes on.
Right. Well, you know, Larian wasn't a huge studio before Baldur's Gate.
No, yeah. So. Yeah. And we're seeing that model again and again. This is where I do have some hope. We see it with Dune Part 2. Huge box office hit. Also a critical darling. It's at 97% or something on Rotten Tomatoes last I looked. It was in the 90s.
Oh, wow.
It's a critical darling. I saw it. I really liked it. I got my own old man opinions about Dune because I've been living with Dune for too long. I'm biased. I have expectations going in. Right? I have issues with the movie, but as a piece of film, it's remarkable. It's quite good. I mean, I saw it twice, and I'll see it a couple more times. It's quite good, and it's notoriously, as far as I know, not the result of the typical studio tampering that you almost just can't avoid anymore because movies aren't making money anymore. It goes back to this whole central problem we're talking about with the way our economy works, right? Dune Part 2, even though it's a reboot, otherwise doesn't do any of that studio crap. That is an auteur's vision. That is Denis Villeneuve, I think is how you pronounce his name. I've even heard it. I still have trouble with it because I'm not good with French names. That director, that's mostly his cut. There wasn't much studio interference. And that bucked the common knowledge in Hollywood, or the common thinking that at this point, to make money at all, you've got to do all these things.
Yeah, but we've seen the push from consumers to see more director's cuts. I mean, look at the Justice League.
Exactly.
And I think certain studios are starting to catch on to that.
That's what I'm saying. I hope we see that. There were other movies like that last year, like Oppenheimer, I think, was more of an auteur's type of vision. Barbie was not necessarily an auteur's movie, but it did kind of famously buck what the studio wanted to do with it. The studio tried to fight that. There's a little bit of cheeky criticism of Barbie. There's a simultaneous celebration and criticism of what Barbie has represented over the years in that movie. So I've heard. I haven't watched it.
It's fantastic. I mean, honestly, funny story. I saw that after the day after a bachelor's party. So there were 5 very hungover men going to see the matinee of Barbie on a Sunday.
Love that.
It was pretty good. Yeah. We all enjoyed it.
Well, that's another case where the studio more or less said, like, that's probably not going to succeed if you do that. We don't want you to do it. And someone somehow talked him out of it and did it.
Yeah.
And it was a huge success. Those things give me hope. All those things give me hope. And what the Larian guy is saying is giving me hope. Hasbro, I know you don't watch our channel. We're too small right now. We're only watched by you fine people who really love us. But if you are listening someday, when we have 10,000 subscribers and you're paying attention to us, please don't screw up our game.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily mind that it's in the hands of Hasbro. I know a lot of people are, and I'm pretty left-wing, but hey, corporations is a thing, you know? I mean, I like Apple. Apple's a corporation, you know? They don't always do things I like. I don't mind that a big corporation has the IP necessarily, or the, you know, the product development, but I really hope they don't screw it up. It still won't kill tabletop RPG gaming. I'm utterly convinced of that. I know lots of industry pundits have said that if D&D starts to fail, then, you know, RPGing is almost practically dead just because it's not in their so-called golden age anymore. I don't think that's the case.
I very much doubt that. There are too many other fantastic alternatives to D&D to let tabletop gaming die just because maybe the juggernaut that has been turned into something very different than what a TTRPG is.
Right. It won't kill
goes to the wayside.
And in the long run, I don't think it'll kill D&D either. I am also old enough to have seen D&D go beyond its first big mass market appeal into eventually into 3rd edition, which revived it a little bit. It revived it among nerds like me. Prior to 3rd edition, D&D was not the hip game to play. It's like board gamers with Catan right now. It's like, oh, please, D&D? You know, it's such an outdated, clunky system. You know, have you played whatever people were playing at that point? You know, RuneQuest or GURPS. Actually, a lot of GURPS in that era. GURPS Fantasy was a better game than AD&D 2nd edition by that point. Okay. In my opinion, some people would find it far too crunchy, but I lean toward that kind of thing anyway. In any case, 3rd edition came along and sort of saved the property in the sense of being a game people wanted to play again, but it was still just TTRPG nerds like me and like my friends. D&D survived that.
Yeah.
In fact, D&D survived more significantly what I was just talking about, the sort of AD&D, the end of the AD&D era where people were turning their nose up at it.
Right.
It survived.
It survived 4th edition.
It survived 4th edition. That's probably saying even more. We've never seen sales numbers for 4th edition. As far as I know, there's no actual proof that 4th edition didn't do well for them, but I think there's a bunch of circumstantial evidence that really points in that direction, not the least of which is how little of a time it was around.
Yeah.
They knew they'd screwed up.
Yeah.
And I know that Matt Colville is a fan of 4th edition, and there are many apologists for it now.
I mean, there's tons of fans of it. Or I wouldn't say tons, but there are fans of it.
It's experiencing a weird kind of quasi-resurgence now.
And that might be just because tactical RPGs are fun.
Right.
And that's really more about the tactical.
Right. And that's a lot of Cole's influence, actually. And I don't begrudge him that because I think he's a fantastic content creator and his videos to help DMs are wonderful. I agree with pretty much everything he says, although I don't like that tactical game. I don't prioritize that tactical game as much as he does. To him, that's everything about playing because that's what he likes. And that's probably why he likes 4th edition. But anyway, yeah, the game survived some really unpopular editions or editions that were getting unpopular before revision. If we get into a worst case scenario and Hasbro completely screws everything up, whatever that would mean, they sell it off and it isn't published for a few years. Somebody's going to buy that. I mean, right now, 2 of Gygax's kids are out there involved in game publishing. Ernie Gygax was involved in that whole flap with Star Frontiers and tried to revive the TSR name. Luke Gygax, I know he's done a bunch of stuff. He's now working with GUI Cube on a module that's kind of an homage to Gary. Maybe one of them, hopefully Luke, would be interested in buying that. It's not going to die.
No.
D&D is, in a way, as a concept, it's too big to fail in the cultural zeitgeist at this moment. Somebody's going to want it. There's money in it. There just may not be Fortune 500 level, publicly traded, massive corporation money in it. But there's money in it.
Yeah.
Someone will pick it up and do something with it.
Absolutely.
Here's a fantasy. This channel takes off. Bigger than our dreams ever, and we become huge names in the game industry, and we buy the D&D property from Hasbro in 10 years from now, when Hasbro is having a fire sale because they're going bankrupt.
Right, yeah. Cool, I'm down with that.
And y'all can become stockholders. Oh, no. Now we're beholden to the shareholders.
Yeah, ooh. But join
what do you guys
Patreon.
want? More money? More growth? No.
But join the Patreon.
Do join the Patreon. I'm not kidding. It's there. Look in the description for the link.
Join the Patreon and you can get on the ground floor level of us buying D&D.
That's right. Actually, we're joking, but I could even see a Kickstarter by some really well-meaning idealistic group where we all own D&D. Like everyone who Kickstarted has some ownership in it. Yeah. And it's protected from being sold as a public company or something by agreement. Look at the way these other industry names are responding to the OGL debacle by rallying around each other and offering each other protection, like the Orc license that Paizo did that other companies are using. That kind of thing could happen too.
Yeah, I think because the OGL exists, you could just assume that it becomes a community-made game. It may not be as well play-tested, but it becomes almost like modders for video games.
Right, which is, it'll be interesting to see exactly how they finalize the OGL for the 2024 books.
Yeah.
There were rumors that that was going to be a more ironclad, far less friendly OGL.
Well, we always have 5e.
Right. 5e is still there. Yeah, absolutely. You could still pick up the OGL from 5e. Or, heck, you could use the Orc license if you wanted to. Yep. Whatever kind of license you wanted to use. But yeah, it could become a community-funded or a community-led thing too. That has happened before in gaming.
Yeah.
And it will not stop happening because this is a hobby.
And people love it.
We are consumers, but we aren't just consumers. This is a hobby and we care about it. And that's what keeps giving me hope. Well, we've taken on another probably controversial topic again. Yeah. We are happy to hear your praise, your angry comments. I don't know what you had for breakfast. You can leave that in a comment if you want to. But we'd love to have some lively discussion in the comments over this. And while you're here, go ahead and check out our video about Chris Cox talking about what he would like to do with AI in D&D and different ways we speculated that might turn out. That video is at the bottom of your screen now. And so is a little subscribe circle. Do as you feel led.